Hello, everyone. It's time for us to get started. Hopefully, we will have people coming in as we go along here. But welcome to the 8th session of the New Mexico Family Advocacy Program's ECHO learning session. NMFAP is a model of parent representation being implemented in the 13th and 2nd judicial districts that utilizes interdisciplinary teams of lawyers, social workers, and parent mentors working effectively together to provide quality representation and the advocacy and support families need for reunification or other preferred outcomes in the child welfare system. As participants in our community of practice, you'll receive professional development from experts and early adopters of the NMFAP model, learn best practices, and collaborate to solve issues that present challenges to providing quality parent representation in the court system. I am Leslie Jones. I'm a lead attorney for NMFAP, and with me here at the hub today, Jennifer.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jennifer Vieira. I work for the AOC as well as the NMFAP program. I'm here as technical assistant, so if any of you all experience any problems during the session, please text me or, text me, go ahead in the group chat, I'm sorry. And also, for anybody who's on the phone, please remember to *6 to mute or unmute yourself when you're going to ask a question or just remain on the line. And also, if there's anybody there with you besides yourself at any of these sessions, please make sure to sign in onto the group chat so that you get credit for your attendance. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Caitlin DeFiore. I am one of the lead social workers for the New Mexico Family Advocacy Program.
Okay, so a couple of housekeeping details. Please, after the session, remember to fill out, to complete our post-session feedback and reflection form. And Jen is going to put that up in the group chat so that you have the link to that. Funding for our professional learning through NMFAP ECHO comes from a federal grant. So these surveys are very important to the program's broader evaluation and continued funding, so we really need you to fill them out. I'd also like to urge any of you who are willing to do a case presentation for one of our sessions. When we send out our announcements, there's a link to the form to fill out and instructions about where to send that. So if you'd please consider doing that as well. So to get started, we are really pleased today. Our workshop is Washington State's statewide interdisciplinary program, how it has improved parent representation and outcomes. And our presenter today is Brett Ballou. He is the managing attorney for the Washington State Office of Public Defense Parents Representation Program. Before his current employment, Brett was appointed for just about every type of case for which an attorney can be appointed in every type of court in the state, including the representation of parents in dependency and termination cases from 1996 to 2007. He's been involved in reform of the child welfare system on both the local level and state level, and spoken on the virtue of high-quality parents' representation around the country. He received his undergraduate degree from the University of Washington and his law degree from the University of Montana. And we'd like to welcome you, Brett.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. This is actually my second opportunity to talk to New Mexico about our program. I got to come down, I think, about 5 years ago. So I'm really excited to, whenever I get to speak about our program, I'm pretty proud of the things that we've been able to do and achieve. I do not have my PowerPoint up. There it is. Okay, so our learning objectives, you can see them there. I mean, it's primarily kind of talking about our program and all of its component parts and how they fit together. And then I'll share with you some of the literature and studies about how this kind of program has improved parent representation. Yeah. And I kind of started thinking about the component parts as kind of being like a house. How you have all these different pieces of lumber and concrete and how they miraculously make this amazing structure that can last a long time and provide things that people need. And so when we build a house, the first thing we're going to start with is our foundation. And for us, the foundation is having a caseload standard. In our state, the caseload standard is 80 cases per attorney. That works out to be about 70, 71 parent clients for a full-time attorney, because we do count a termination case as an additional case. Oops, that did not go to where I wanted it to go. Let me see if I can get that hyperlink to go. Yeah. Well, this worked when we tried this earlier. It's not letting me go to the hyperlink. I will then call an audible, and I will go through all the component parts and then revisit them with a little bit more specificity. So kind of think of the framing of the house as our client communication with frequent and meaningful contact. And then our walls are the investigation that attorneys have the time to do because of the caseload standard. And then our OPD social workers, we also call them social service specialists, and our parent allies or parent mentors. The roof is our oversight and support by our office, making sure that our contractors, both our attorney contractors and our social work contractors, are meeting standards of representation, and then it's also providing technical support to them. So the doors and windows are our advocacy, the advocacy for visitation and our advocacy for services. These are kind of the two focus points that we think are probably the most important. Visitation, a visitation that meets the developmental needs of the child. There have been studies with judges asking them about the amount of visits that they routinely order versus the amount that they want to, and it's about half is what I've seen, is they don't give as many visits as they would like, and we really think about this from a child standpoint, right? It's making sure that each child, given their development, what is it that they need? If it's an infant who needs 5 days care, that's the 5 days of visits or 7 days of visits, then that's what should be ordered, not what is convenient to the department or to the court, right? It really needs to be meeting kids' needs. And then advocacy for services, and we'll talk a little bit more about what more time allows an attorney to do. Obviously making sure that we have services that are not cookie cutter services that are just ordered in every case regardless of the needs of the family, but really services that are addressing the individual needs of that family and the parents. And then another important piece, and kind of think about this as the landscaping. We really operate in two worlds. It's a collaborative social work world, and it's a adversarial world. And there's an interesting paper on this by Frank Vandevort about how where legal ethics and social work ethics collide makes it difficult for social workers to kind of operate in that adversarial world because they don't understand it as well. And the same goes for attorneys. And I think back to some of the lessons that we've learned when the headquarters for the department has rolled out new policies. We used to get really excited about that and immediately let all of our attorneys and social workers know what the new policy was and kind of go get them, guys. And that didn't work. I mean, it didn't effectuate change, and it also created some difficult relationships because oftentimes when you're talking about, like, our department has 2,500 employees. So when headquarters makes a decision, it takes a long time for that stuff to filter down. And if our attorneys know about it before the social workers do and are confronting them in the adversarial process, now you're creating some odd relationships. So we've been doing a lot of work in our state making sure that everybody understands their roles and responsibilities, understands the different ethics that come into play depending on which arena you're in, whether it's the collaborative social work arena or whether it's the adversarial legal one. And it's actually a continuing process. I think one of the things that I'm kind of excited about is several years ago, headquarters for the department approached us with, they wanted to roll out a new safety framework. And they recognized that they needed to train everybody. The court needed to be trained in it. The attorneys need to be trained in it. The cost, everybody needed to be trained kind of at the same time when you rolled it out. So, and we had there was some success with that. We also have a new visitation policy. It's actually 2 years old, but that one has been, it's out, but then there's a lot of work being done in the individual counties to make sure that everyone understands what the policy is, why it's needed, what is the visits that are required that meet the developmental needs of a child, and kind of a little bit more of a collaborative process of rolling out policies. And in the counties where we've done that work, the policy's been implemented, and we have data to show that the objectives have been met. So definitely everybody understanding the collaborative nature, being able to operate in that space and in the adversarial space is hugely important. Okay, so now I should be able to go back and kind of hit each of these, each of our component parts of our house. And so I'm going to go back and talk about the caseload standards, and a little bit of this is my own personal story. I think in my bio it talked about how I represented parents from 1996 to 2007, and I kind of came into dependencies. I lived in a county where public defense was done either by contract or by individual appointments, and I was trying to make a living doing individual appointments, and I got appointed to a lot of juvenile offender cases, and I happened to be down there when the judge needed someone for a dependency case, and he appointed me, and I said, great, what's a dependency? And it didn't take very long before I had 100 dependency cases, in addition to a felony caseload, in addition to a juvenile offender caseload, and a misdemeanor caseload. That was what was required if you wanted to make a living doing public defense. And what that led to, or and a part of my felony caseload, particularly in the last couple of years of my not being a part of the Parents Representation Program, was I usually had a homicide case too. So what that looked like for dependency clients was it was a courthouse steps representation. And my story is actually really consistent with some work that our director did back in 1999, studying the state of parents representation throughout our state. And so my story is actually a common one. And so courthouse steps representation looks like just how it sounds. I met my clients at court, and that was where I saw them, which meant that I often only saw them every 6 months. And it meant that when we got to court, I asked them if they had received the case plan, if they'd read it, if they understood it, and if they did, if they agreed to it. And if so, then we could sign off on it, and then I would see them again in 6 months. And that would be the extent of the representation that they were getting. If they didn't agree to it, then we'd have to continue the case. And then I would take the time to try to figure out what the problems were. And you can see how that makes cases go longer, right? I mean, if I'm continuing a case, just that continuance makes the case go longer. But also, if you think about all the things that happen outside of the courthouse, I think we're kind of fond of saying that the most important things are actually happening outside of court. So any problems that came up with visitation, any problems that came up with services, or anything else would have to wait 6 months before they were actually addressed, and 6 months plus the continuance. So it's just not a very good way of serving families, let alone serving a client. So that to us, that's why the caseload standard is so important. When I started the parents representation program, I was able to lose 20 dependency cases plus everything else. I also had a slight increase in my income, so I was able to make a living with just doing 80 cases, and it really drastically changed what I was able to do with my clients. And we also kind of feel like if you don't have a caseload standard, the rest of it doesn't really matter, because the advocacy kind of goes away. The things that you need an attorney to do goes away. So the next piece that we were talking about was client communication, and about a third of our attorneys' time is spent on client communication, and that's I live that too. I was a contractor from the end of 2005 till 2007 when I started working here. You're really able to get into what are the direct client's needs. It allows the client to actually feel heard. I know when I take client complaints, most of the time it's an issue of the client not feeling heard and trying to figure out what it is that client needs to feel heard. Because until they are, they're kind of stuck in whatever place they are. They're kind of stuck, and it's harder for them to engage. That's definitely our experience on that. Obviously you can be trauma responsive, and you're better prepared. I think the other thing that when you develop those deep client relationships, and the client feels like that you have their best interest at heart and they trust you, then when you have to deliver the bad news, they're going to be more receptive to it, and be able to make whatever decisions they feel like are in the best interest of their child. I think that's how I approached a lot of my clients, was by right from the get-go, talking about how as long as what they were telling me was something they felt was in the best interest of their client, then we were on solid footing. We could work with that. I think the thing that's changed in our state, and I'm sure in yours as well, but it's definitely been interesting to me, is communicating with clients via text. Our attorneys who do that, and it's now almost all of them. 4 or 5 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to say that. But they're the ones that have the best relationships with their clients, because frankly, they're meeting their clients where they are. Whether it's because they're younger and this is the best mode of communication, or whether it's because it's the one that they can afford. It's been amazing to watch that. And it's also been amazing to watch that spread. Some courts are doing it in terms of notifying clients of court dates. I know criminal law attorneys are doing it. Our social workers in our state are doing it as well, which is made for some interesting discovery issues. But it's definitely been a place where I feel like clients are more accessible than maybe when back when I was doing it in the 1990s. Yeah, and I know for me, I think we just talked a lot about this. This was definitely kind of a godsend for me. I was getting super burnt out with my high caseloads and feeling like I wasn't serving people the way that I wanted to serve them. And so being able to have a caseload standard and be a contractor with Office of Public Defense really helped. But more importantly, it helped my clients. So I talked a little bit about expert services. Let's see, expert services was part of the walls, part of the investigation piece. And I remember prior to our program, I would have had access to expert services, but I didn't really know what expert services I wanted to access. And I also had that hurdle of having to go to the court and justify the expense to the court. In our program, now it really takes an email from our attorney saying, I need an expert for this reason, this is who it is, and this is how much it's going to cost. And we're generally going to approve those. We might push back a little bit on cost. We'll definitely push back if it's a service that's a court-ordered service that the department should be paying for. But for the most part, we're gonna we're accessible to our attorneys, and then we also have the knowledge base of knowing what the expert services are around the state, so we can address that through technical assistance calls. Noticed a change when we first started using expert services. We thought that it was going to be primarily second opinion psych evals. And it was for a good period of time. But you can kind of see how in 2011, 7% were forensic social workers, and now today it's 20%. And really it's 29% because it's the forensic social workers that are doing the home study piece. And so I definitely want to make sure I distinguish forensic social worker from our contracted social worker. Our contracted social workers, I'll talk a little bit more about how they're operating in the collaborative space. Our forensic social workers are very much operating in the adversarial space. These are people that have worked for the department previously, usually have decades of experience. Maybe have trained social workers on the very policies that they're reviewing, but they can take a look at a case and see if the department is handling it consistent with their policies and best practices. And then they can make recommendations to the court about a different course of action. I think a lot of the feedback that we've received from judicial officers is, hey, it's not enough for the attorney to stand up and say, we don't, the department's case plan is bad. Right, you have to have an alternative, and so the best alternatives are going to come from experts, and that's where our expert forensic social workers come in. And then they'll also do home studies, which will allow the department allow the court to make a placement decision that might be contrary to what the department wants. And then we've also seen the rise of the medical forensic review as attorneys have become more skilled, and we've become more skilled about recognizing the need for experts in complex medical cases. Okay, so our OPD social worker, they are contracted with us. They serve as agents of the attorney. The attorney makes the referral. There's one social worker for every 4 full-time attorneys, so attorneys can't have a social worker on every case. They're same qualifications as actually, I should have changed the slide, we're no longer Children's Administration, we're DCYF now. But they provide a great support for parents. It's up to the attorneys how they want to use them, but what we found is that they can be both to the attorney and to the parent. They can be a great translator for what those social work ethics are and what those collaborative ethics are and how people have to work. They can also team up with the social worker. I know I was fortunate to have one of the first social workers, and when I was a contractor, and we were trying to figure out how this was going to work. And I kind of got an idea that things were working when I started receiving calls from department social workers saying, hey, can you please get Mark involved? I can't really engage this parent. I think the majority, almost all of our social workers are really operating in that space where sometimes they're even teaming up with the department social worker on trying to find ways to make this case plan work for parents. And then, they also, we're really big on empowering parents to take charge of their service plan. If you read the brochure from the department, that's their goal too, is to have families be in charge. but it's hard. And so I think our social workers can help make that happen. I think we have family team decision-making meetings, and I think sometimes the joke is they're family told decision-making meetings because sometimes it feels like the department comes in with, this is what it's going to be. And having a social worker at an FTDM helps make sure that the parent actually has a voice. And our attorneys go to FTDMs as well. So, but just kind of holding them accountable to some of their principles is a big part of what we're doing. Our Parent for Parent program, the good news is it just went statewide for us, which is really exciting. Different from the OPD social worker in the sense that they are not an agent of the attorney. The money passes through our office and then through Children's Home Society to the different counties. And so they kind of set up their own systems. And I don't think that's bad. I think that these are individuals who are uniquely situated to give hope. Right, that's their business is the hope business for parents, and everywhere that these programs have sprung up, I think people have marveled at just how effective they are. I know it's been interesting to watch courts rely on some of the parent mentors and developing that trust with them and listening to what they have to say. But they're definitely great advocates for the parents. And I think one of the things that's been interesting for us is that the parent mentors who've been doing it for a while, a good number of them have actually gone on to become social workers for us. And so we have a chunk of our social workers who really have that background, and it's been fun to see. I think about a third of our social workers now have come up through being parent mentors. So I think the roof was oversight by us. Our office provides training and technical assistance. I'm one of 6 managers. We have 5 managing attorneys and 1 managing social worker, and we really see ourselves as the supports for our contractors. That's the most important part of our job. So whether it be providing the training or the technical assistance, we can provide a lot of support that way. We obviously we also, they're independent contractors, so we do have to monitor the standards of the contract. So we do monitor caseloads and time and client communication hours, making sure that our attorneys are spending about 30% of their time communicating with their client. We respond to complaints about attorneys, and then we also do attorney reviews every 2 years and try to see every one of our attorneys. It's now 225 contract attorneys, and we try to see every one of them every year in court. And importantly, if we're going to do all this, does it work? And I kind of want to start with our studies on this. Hey, the hyperlink worked. We have, I think, 9 different evaluations of our program over the years, spanning back from 2000 to I think the last one is 2012. This is one that we did in 2010, and we updated it in 2011. And what we were looking for was do more kids go home? What are the reunification rates? And we noticed that we measured the same period of time for OPD counties and non-OPD counties. And in we noticed this drastic increase in OPD counties from the pre-program period to the post-program period. And there was actually a slight decrease in non-OPD counties. So we know more kids go home as a result of the program. And then there's also another study. I actually should have given you the site. I'll just say it in case you want it. In Children and Youth Services Review, volume 34. It's from 2012, pages 1337 to 1343. What's interesting about this study, well, there's a few things. One, it was done by Mark Courtney, who's one of the biggest child welfare researchers out there. And it's when he was at the University of Washington at Partners for Our Children. And what he was hearing from the department and from the attorneys for the state was that having this enhanced parents representation was slowing cases down, that it was putting up roadblocks between achieving permanency and achieving permanency in a timely fashion. And I can get the logic of that. Like, if you all of a sudden have attorneys who have time and who are litigating things, it probably does feel that way to you, because there's more cases where you're experiencing pushback than what you experienced before. But that doesn't make it so. It may just feel that way. And so what Mark Courtney found was that no, that wasn't true. That where kids went home, it happened about a month sooner, and where adoptions and guardianships occurred, that actually happened about a year sooner. I've always looked upon that as of being proof that we're actually good for children because we speak permanency. And then I want to go back and talk about another exciting study that just came out. It's from New York, and from looking at New York City's interdisciplinary program. And it kind of builds off ours, but has a little bit different model. They had a different way of being able to look at it. But the gist of it is that kids go home 118 days sooner in New York as a result of having an interdisciplinary model. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think both of those studies are obviously important because you need to know if things are working. But these two studies, I think, are one, they're in Children's Youth Services Review, and I think that there's a very good argument that this is good for kids. Now, being good for kids doesn't necessarily mean that you can convince people that you ought to do it. I think the other piece to it is that you have to talk about the money, and the New York study addresses that a little bit. I know it's something that we've been able to talk about. We figure, given our numbers, and every state's going to be different, but giving our numbers that it takes about 3.5 years for a interdisciplinary program to pay for itself, and then after that it more than pays for itself. Obviously that's important too, and that's important to your funders, and that's, that part's, I don't know, I should probably stop there and stop editorializing, but yeah, so that is what I know. So I'm not sure how to get out of there. Or how you want to proceed with questions. So I'm not hearing anyone if I'm supposed to.
Hi, Brett. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, it's Dominica. I was waiting for the hub to let us ask questions. Oh, now that the hub is on, I'll let you guys.
Yes. Okay. We were finally able to get back to. Okay. So yes. So we would thank you very much, Brett. We would like to open it up for questions. And so just a couple of reminders before you go, Dominica. One is that if you have questions, please, first of all, if you have video, please, it makes it much easier for us if you can turn it on now for the Q&A part of the session. If you put a hand up, we'll then know that you have something that you want to say, and we'll unmute you, or you can unmute yourself. You can also put questions or comments into the chat, and then we can get to that as soon as possible. So go ahead, Dominica.
Thanks, Leslie. Hey, Brett. Thank you for all of that information that you provided us just now, and for agreeing to participate in the ECHO for us today. It was very informative. What's in my head right now is I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how it is that you and your team effectively advocate for more visitation. What does that look like in the courtroom? And if it occurs out of the courtroom, what does that look like? What are some of the phrases that you use, in order to convince CYFD and to convince judges that more visits is a safe, healthy, beneficial thing?
So we've approached that in two different ways. There is the courtroom piece, and we have looked to experts and have actually a brief written by an expert that our attorneys can use. We also have the studies that it's pretty clear. Like if you just look at all the literature that parents and kids need to see one another as often as the kid needs, and in doing that, we're a little hamstrung legally in the sense that visitations are not considered a service when we get to termination, and so it kind of puts our attorneys in a legal spot where they're just having to appeal to the court one about what's good for kids. So I always try to remind people to argue from a kid's perspective on visits, not from what's a parent's right, but what is best for that child, because they're going to be the same anyway, right? For the most part. And then, so making sure the attorneys have the ability to attach scientific studies to their briefing. We do have a brief bank that has visitation work on that as well. The other space is the collaborative space. And one of the other managing attorneys in our office, Jacob D'Annunzio, is kind of our point person on this. And he's been he was a part of the committee that got the policy change. And the big policy change for us was headquarters recognizing that supervised visits were being used too often. So now the policy says that visits are to be supervised unless there's a safety reason not. But I will tell you that that is a hard culture shift for the department. Social workers don't want to do it, in part because of their own feelings, department social workers, in part because of their own feelings of liability, not wanting to be the kid, or not wanting to be the person who allowed a unsupervised visit where a kid gets hurt. And we actually had one kind of famously in our state on a Super Bowl Sunday where kids went into a supervised visit into a parent's home, and he shut the door before the visit supervisor could get in there and killed his kids and himself. So it's kind of something that right people think about and kind of lingers. So that has to be done in a collaborative way. So Jacob is a part of that committee. He actually speaks at lots of our statewide trainings, to CASAs, to the department, about that very issue and about the importance of visitation. And then we've done the visitation forums where the policy and the science have all been rolled out to the individual courts, the county courts. Right, so the judges, the CASAs, the department, everybody's there hearing the same information, and then holding them accountable through data. So the department's been able to supply the data saying, yes, and before the visitation forum, 80% of the visits were supervised, and now that's gone down to 50%. So good job. Or there was no change, so now we're not, So it really takes a collaborative effort, and you definitely need leadership in order to do that. Hopefully, the best kind is judicial leadership. So if the judges are invested, then they can bring the whole system along. But it takes at least one leader in the community that's able to inspire. This is something that we want to do as a group, and then follow through by keeping data on it and measuring it.
Thank you, Brett. Did that answer your question, Dominica?
Yes, thank you very much.
Great. Anybody else have a question that they would like to ask Brett? Not seeing any hands up. Brett, I actually had a couple of things. One is that what do you think that the biggest adjustments have been for the attorneys, either mental adjustments or practice management adjustments? What do you think that have been the biggest adjustments for them taking on an interdisciplinary practice and working with the social workers?
I think there's a number of them that could be different for every attorney. For me, it was so when you're a high volume public defender, you develop a lot of shortcuts to manage your caseload, and I had to start dismantling those and started thinking in a different way. Right? No, I actually do have time. I do have time for this client. Where it might be a client that I go, ugh, these facts are bad, I can't help them, so I'll just put them aside, I'll only address the cases where I can do something. No, I had to stop doing that. And finding out that those cases that you think are bad may not be so bad if you actually connect with the parent and work them through. So that was one for me. It's been interesting whenever we've rolled out, when we've brought social workers into the fold, attorneys not knowing how to use them, being worried about attorney-client privilege issues and kind of staying away. We've gradually worked with them on that, and almost to a person, they've come to value those relationships and sometimes become the greatest users of social workers once they saw what was possible and what could be helpful to them. I think some of our attorneys have come into this work with a social worker bent and felt like I don't need a social worker because I do those things and I love doing those things. And so some of them, it's taken a while too. To see the value of having a partner. But again, given time, people have been able to come around to it and adjust to it. It's just, I just think it takes a while for people to see what's possible.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions out there for Brett? I have a few more if nobody does, but I'm hoping that some of you will have some. I also wanted to ask Brett what your program has learned about, because one of the things that we've noticed in our pilot program that does come up is clients splitting the team. So telling the social worker one thing, telling the attorney something else, telling the department something else. Have you guys developed any insights into how you've managed those things and ways to deal with
that? That happens. It absolutely happens. And I'm just trying to think of some of the strategies. And sometimes our office gets involved in that too, even though we don't represent anyone. We only hear about these things if the client calls us with a complaint, but then they'll start triangulating. And I think one of the things that's been important for us to remember is, that's a frustrating behavior, but the clients frequently have a trauma history or a mental health history, and just remembering that and not making sure that we have an understanding and then we have a strategy around it. So I can think back to a couple of cases where our social worker and our attorneys have, once they've realized, oh, that's what's going on, we need to develop some boundaries around that or some rules around that work for us to make sure that isn't happening, but still understanding that this is just another piece of the puzzle for the challenge of that particular client.
Okay, thank you.
How do you guys handle it?
I think the biggest thing has been making sure that everybody is communicating on a regular basis. And I think in a few cases where clients we haven't been able to manage that as well, we've started like group texts or group emails with the attorney and the social worker and the client so that everybody is receiving the same information at the same time.
Great.
Anybody else who's had experience with that? I know we have a couple of our attorneys on and a couple of social workers. Anybody else have any experience with that you would want to share about dealing with client triangulation and what you've come up with? Anything? No? But that does lead into another question that I was going to ask, and that is, how do your attorneys and social workers share file information, documents, reports, all of that kind of stuff, as well as just kind of general communication? I mean, I'm assuming there's a variety, but like how does that happen in your system?
Well, we always have to be mindful that our attorneys and our social workers are independent contractors. So we actually don't mandate how that occurs. What we do is we puts the social workers in an awkward spot because that means they have to serve a bunch of different bosses who may have different views on how we're going to share files, how we're going to communicate with one another, what's permissible to share with others. So I think that is definitely a challenge for our social workers, but it seems to have worked. And so in terms of sharing information, it's really down to each individual attorney social worker relationship.
Would you say that it's relatively common? I mean, you talked in your presentation about having more client time. Does that happen relatively frequently where the meetings that you're having with the client, the social worker is also present?
Yeah. Yeah, for the cases that they're on. And it works differently. So I think with some of our attorneys, what it looks like is, cool, I need a social worker on this case. Here, you handle it. I don't recommend that. I don't think that's the best practice. I think it really has to be a collaborative, work with each other kind of situation. But we also have, the bulk of our contractors aren't full-time. And since they're part-time contractors in rural communities, they are making their living partly on our contract, but partly doing other things. So they're going to rely on the social worker to handle the things for which they're unavailable, like going to the meetings that they can't go to because they're in court.
Right. Okay. Do you have a process for if you had a social worker who felt like the attorney had basically just handed off the case and was not paying attention, not being responsive, do you have a process for handling, that?
Yeah, our social workers can contact us and let us know that they're having a problem with a particular attorney, and we can help try to solve that, for sure. Yeah, this one's kind of been a weird one, something that we didn't contemplate was going to happen, and that is that sometimes the social workers end up catching things that attorneys aren't doing right. Sometimes they're wrong about it. Sometimes there's some disagreements. They'll contact us and say, this attorney isn't doing this thing. And we're like, well, that's not, that's not a valid thing. That's not a valid complaint. The ones who've been able to let us know about attorneys who aren't doing the work well. And we've had to move on that, which puts the social workers in a really awkward spot because it's not their job to be the police. And it also it's made for some uneasy relationships in some counties where attorneys thought that maybe that's what was happening. So then they didn't want to use a social worker. Right. So we've had to kind of manage through those minefields a little bit. And I think a lot of it is if there's a problem or if the parent's having a problem and they're expressing the problem out their attorney through their social worker, we we ask that the parent actually contact us, and so that we can deal with the attorney-client relationship, not the attorney-social worker-client relationship, and try to keep the social workers out of the middle as much as possible. But it's tough because social workers are by their nature social justice warriors, right? And so when they see something happening and they can't figure out why it's happening, and they worry that it's the attorney that's in the way, they got to speak out. And so I think for the most part, it hasn't become a big problem. It's something that we've been able to navigate, and when it's popped up and figure out pretty well. And I think our attorneys understand that. And I think, like, when our program first started, the bar for who the least skillful attorneys were wasn't good. There were some people in our program that just weren't. They did not know how to do parents representation. Well, that bar is much higher now, right? So the people who would be at the bottom end of the spectrum are actually pretty good attorneys. So so we're not actually hearing about that issue as much now that we've gotten rid of or stopped contracting with the people that have been problems.
Okay, thanks. I also wanted to ask, can you clarify, give some more examples about what's the difference between your social workers and the forensic social workers? What do the forensic social workers actually do?
Okay, so the forensic social workers are not contracted with us. They get paid by because the attorney said, hey, I need an expert, and so we'll pay them whatever their fee is for that case. Our social workers are contracted with us, and so that's one difference. And what the forensic social workers are doing is really operating in that adversarial space. We never wanted our OPD social workers to be put in the position of having to look over the department social worker's shoulder and point out all the ways that they're doing things wrong, because then they can't collaborate. So that became really important to us, but a lot of our attorneys are like, wait, I want my social worker to testify because I want to point out what the department's doing wrong. And so our response to that was, well, you don't want that in every case. So let's talk about using experts to fulfill that role. And Mike Hurd, who is our social services manager, used to work for the department. He was an area administrator for them. And he had a lot of connections. A lot of the people that were working in the department with him are now starting to work their way out of, whether through retirement or wanting to go do different things. So now we have this stable of people who have this tremendous department experience, who can really comb through on a case-by-case basis, can look at a service plan, can look through all the department discovery and see opportunities that were missed, see where they weren't following policy, see where they weren't following best practices. I know one that comes up from time to time is sometimes I'll be providing technical assistance, and in my conversation with the attorney, something will get triggered in my head, and I'll say, is your client a victim of domestic violence? And the attorney like, oh, yeah, we've been talking about that. It's like, oh, okay. Well, did you know that there's this whole policy, there's a whole social work practice guide that the department has on how they're supposed to work with victims of domestic violence? Well, the attorney might not know that, and the social worker probably doesn't know that, which is odd, but true. So one of our forensic social workers actually wrote that guide, along with other folks too, and can go through and look through, oh yeah, see, this is all the ways that this social worker is treating this victim of domestic violence in a way that you're not supposed to treat victims of domestic violence, right? And they're not assessing for safety, and they didn't work with them on whether there was a safety plan that could have been made to keep this child safe in their care, and right. So then they're able to write a report and come and testify about all the ways that the department did it wrong. But the most important piece is having the alternate plan for what should be done, and being able to tell the judge, yeah, their plan doesn't work, but ours does, and this is why. And then here's all the social science behind it. Here's all the best practices behind it. Here's all the policy reasons behind it.
Do they ever do things like review visitation notes or meeting notes, like, because what comes to mind is when a parent's behavior gets characterized in a certain way by the department, that may not be really what's going on. And so do they look at those?
Absolutely. They can do that. They can also go and observe visits and see if they're seeing the same behaviors. And then also talk about how the visits ought to progress. One of the problems in our state historically and even today is that we had unsupervised visits throughout the life of the case, and then when it was time for the kid to return home, now we're transitioning home. Where, right, we should definitely have some sort of transition between supervised or monitored visits to unsupervised visits to a return home. There's some structural reasons for that the social workers were kind of stuck in having to make those recommendations. And that policy, a new policy, has not been able to fix. And so it takes having a forensic social worker to be able to come in and say, no, this is how you do it. This is how you do a return home. And then again, then the court has something to operate from, right?
Right. Okay, thank you. I'm going to take a quick break because I know that sometimes people need to leave the session by 1 o'clock. And that's coming up in about 5 minutes. I just wanted to remind anyone who does need to leave to please take a look at the link. It's in the group chat for the post-session feedback form, and please do fill that out if you can and send it back in. That's important for us. So does anybody else have any questions for Brett? Do you have any questions? Anybody else have any questions for Brett?
Let's see if anybody else.
No?
Brett, can you talk to us a little bit about how you guys have handled conflicts in ethical values between social workers and attorneys when situations have arisen?
Yeah, do you have an example?
Um,
I only asked that because I thought it sounded like the question was coming from a place of something that may have happened with you, but
no, it's just it's been an ongoing discussion we've had about kind of mandated reporting and what that looks like in different states. I know we've talked to Colorado kind of about what their policy is, and I just wanted to get a better feel for what you guys do in regards.
Okay, so around mandated reporting specifically, our social workers are mandated reporters, and we're kind of stuck with that. That's just what the statute says. We've done a lot of worrying about it without it being a big deal, which is kind of interesting because it's only come up a few times where there was an actual conflict and the consequences of it didn't really pan out to be anything major. So the way that we've viewed it is that our attorneys have an ethical obligation to prevent their agents from disclosing confidential information. So if our attorneys do that and they say, hey, social worker, don't do that, they have now fulfilled their ethical obligation. Now it's up to the social worker to determine whether that thing rose to the level of what's required in our state to be a mandated reporter. Most of the time when the social workers have contacted us, we've been able to say with great confidence that it's not a thing that they have to report. But it is a crime, it's a gross misdemeanor in our state not to report. So we recognize that the social worker has to kind of wrestle with that and figure out what to do. The other piece is just overcoming what it means to be a mandated reporter and how it's trained. So our department has a great training on what mandated reporters are supposed to do because so many people are mandated reporters in our state. And it's a smart one. Hey, report and we'll sort it out, right? Just err on the side of reporting and we'll figure out whether it's a problem or not. That doesn't work for us. So we have to do a really good job of training our social workers that it's the opposite, that it's you have to talk to the attorney first. You can call here first and really talk through and figure out if it actually is something. But ultimately it is a attorney social worker call because it's their case. They're collaborating, right? So if they're communicating, I think that's, for the most part, that is worked out. I think it's only happened like twice where one of our social workers has had to report. So lots of consternation, lots of worry because the potential's there for something bad to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. Not good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Looks like Renee has a question. So Renee, I'm going to unmute you now, or if you can unmute yourself. Let's see. It's not.
Mute.
There we go.
Okay, did I do it? I feel like
Yeah.
I've got like 50 balls with the screen going on. So I am really interested in that ethical issue because I think that for me, the social work ethics are, I don't want to say they're so different from ours. But I feel like as an attorney, our underlying goal is to protect our client's interest. And so a lot of times, I think about this all the time, a lot of times that includes us stopping our client from talking, even in general meetings or in communication with the social workers. So I think that for us, at least for me, I feel like a better understanding of the social work ethics would be beneficial, because I don't think necessarily it's a mandatory report situation. I think it's more like ethical boundaries. So if I know something that I don't want CYFD to know, I just make sure I don't tell CYFD, and I tell my client, we can't lie to them, but we don't want to let them know things. So let's push through this difficulty and see where we are in a week. And if it's something that you need help with, then let's reach out further. But if not, it's something you got through, like no harm, no foul. I guess for me, that's really where that ethics is going to come into play.
Yeah, I think the Frank Vandervoort article that I mentioned, and I can send out later, is definitely a good read that talks about the difference in ethics. And I think part of the skill is making sure that folks understand what arena you're operating in at that given moment. Because for attorneys, we're going to operate collaboratively to the extent that we can until we have some reason not to. And that feels really weird to a social worker when we've decided that nope, that's not what we're going to do. And so I think sometimes where you can, being very clear about why it is you're doing what you're doing. Sometimes you can't say, but sometimes if you just mentioning, hey, I'm operating in my sphere of ethics, and as a group in your local in your local judicial system, making sure that everybody understands and is thinking about how weird this world is, where we have to operate collaboratively and adversarially, and how weird is the fact that in a social work world, we're going to generally it's going to be an open sharing of information, and it's going to be a process where all voices are heard, and we're all going to work together to achieve some goal. Where for attorneys, it's going to look a little bit different when it has to look different, and there's good reasons for it looking different, and people need to understand what a behemoth the state is, and that their actions are about as it's about a can't get the words out here, as an intrusive thing that any state can do when they inject themselves into the lives of a family. And so making sure that people understand how important your role is in that, making sure that the state isn't behaving outside the bounds of what they're allowed to do. And what social workers don't think about that, because they're just trying to do social work, and they're wearing the white hats. They're trying to protect kids. So anytime that someone does something contrary to that, it feels weird to them. And so I think we really have to do a good job as a system, all participants, making sure that we understand those roles and what it is that we're doing and why we're doing them and why it's important that we do them. And I know there's a lot of work being done on that in our state, has been for a while in individual communities where things boil up. I think we need to do a better job of doing that in general. I think one thing that our office has tried to do, I've spoken a number of times, all the managers in our office have done this from time to time, has spoken at any of our statewide multidisciplinary conferences, just spreading that message. And making sure that people understand that when attorneys act weird, it's for ethical reasons and it's for good reasons, and don't be too offended by it. And then there's some individual skill level that you can use, like I know Amelia, one of the other managers, always talks about how when she was going to cross-examine a social worker ahead of time. Right, this is a social worker that she has to work with in a collaborative way, but when she knows that she's going to have to cross-examine that person and it's going to be rough, then giving that social worker a little bit of a heads up, just saying, hey, this, today is going to be a rough day, but tomorrow we'll be back to working together. I'm just doing the things that I'm supposed to do for my job, and just cultivating those relationships and how important it is. For a system to work together, because we do. That's just the gist of it, right? We have to work together, and we also and yeah, I know I'm repeating myself here, but it's so weird that we have to do it in two different ways.
Right, thank you. Renee, did that answer your question?
It did. Thank you. I think too, for some of us who may have gone to law school a longer time ago, the whole idea of that collaborative approach really is a new concept. It's not something that, at least I don't feel like I trained on that in school, and that even to the point where I think until a few years ago, we really saw this process as us versus them. So I'm really excited about the collaborative approach, and seeing those studies where you're able to say, wow, this does make a difference is like great confirmation. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions for Brett? No? Okay, well then I think that we are done. We'll finish up. Brett, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciated having you present for us and share the information that you have and the experience that you have with an interdisciplinary program. Is very helpful to us as we move through our program. I want to remind everybody to please fill out the post-session surveys. Also, if you're willing to do a case presentation, consider that. And please, if you've found these sessions helpful, please talk with your peers, encourage them to join us so that we can expand our community of practice. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.